Our next panel is Do Not Pass Go, How Government is Killing Capitalism, with Tom Schatz, Citizens Against Government Waste, Dr. Greg Dolan, ACU Foundation Senior Fellow, and former U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Secretary Jim Bernley. Moderated by Executive Director of the American Conservative Union, Dan Schneider.
Thank you all. I know you know what capitalism is. Let me just tell you that capitalism is the greatest antidote to poverty the world has ever seen. And as my friend Charlie Kirk would say, socialism sucks. When Charlie says it, he gets a bigger applause than I do, but he does it better than I do. But what is capitalism? Capitalism is the economic expression of conservatism. We're here at the American Conservative Union's Conservative Political Action Conference. So please understand that capitalism is that expression that we all believe in. And ultimately what it does is it respects the rights of individuals just like you to make your own choices. The media often gets this wrong, and they try to characterize capitalism as some sort of law of the jungle approach, where it's just the most evil person wins. And that's not true. Capitalism requires rules. Capitalism says you can't lie, cheat, or steal. You can't kill. But within the rules, you fight fiercely, and the most competitive company or person gets to win. We have the Olympics going on right now. In sports, we have rules. You can't take steroids. You can't trip your opponent. But within those rules, the best athlete wins. That's the same as capitalism. But when do rules become so excessive that those rules have government picking winners and losers? That's what this panel is about today. The examples of where government has gone too far and in its work is picking who wins and sometimes who loses and sometimes both who wins and loses. So I mentioned athletes and how there are rules. Well, the federal government is imposing rules on people who watch athletics. Tom Schatz is here with me, president of Citizens Against Government Waste. I've known of Tom longer than I've known him personally. We have a Reagan cabinet member with us today. We always try to get Reagan cabinet members with us today. Jim Bernley, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure, thank you.
And Dr. Gregory Dolan, to my immediate left, but not philosophically to my left. He is both a physician and an attorney. He's an expert. We are going to have a good conversation. But Tom, what is the status when government decides what viewers do and what people who enjoy sports do when it comes to betting? And I know that there are going to be differences of opinion about whether there should be betting or not, but what's the status of this now?
Well, first of all, how many of you are going to bet on March Madness next month? Right? Hey, everything you're doing is illegal according to the federal government. Because in 1992, Congress passed the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, notice the word gambling is not in there, to essentially grandfather in 4 states that already had the opportunity and the laws that permitted gambling. Nevada had the most extensive, so they continue to be the only place that this is legal. The other states really didn't have much of an industry. So the rest of the states can't do this. New Jersey decided enough was enough. The voters voted 2-1 to allow sports gaming in the state. They challenged this in the Supreme Court, and it was heard. Interestingly, a lot of the justices thought that these states should have this right. This is a $150 billion a year industry, a lot of capitalism, a lot of money, a lot of jobs, high-paying jobs. So whether you support or oppose gaming or gambling, I would think you would all support the idea of states having the right to decide for themselves whether or not to pursue this particular opportunity. There's about 32 states that said they would do it if they had the opportunity. And this is a great example of the government interfering with the free market and allowing the states and the people to make their own decisions.
Yeah, I mean, it seems absurd that the federal government is picking some states to do it one way and picking other states to do it the other way. Again, there can be a difference of opinion on what policy should be toward gambling, but it just seems absurd that the federal government would pick winners and losers among the states. Jim, this is not the only example where the federal government imposes an absurd outcome on states.
It is not. In fact, there is a rule, Dan, that was issued in 1916, still being enforced.
16, not 16.
1916, 102 years ago, still being enforced at the Federal Highway Administration, that discourages the states from purchasing any device for their highways, safety devices, better materials, whatever, if it has a patent on it. 102 years. And the good news is that I understand pretty shortly a petition to repeal that rule will be filed at the U.S. Department of Transportation, and I think this administration will be very sympathetic to that.
Yeah, you educated me on this the other day, and I just instantly thought, that's the horse and buggy rule, where
Exactly.
states are forced to have horses
Well
and
put.
buggies, and I mean, just absurd. But this gets to innovation. Now,
does.
I've got Dr. Gregory Dolan, who's, again, a physician, and so he obviously cares about people's health. But we've got all sorts of products out there that are harmful. Look, I slipped on the ice and broke my hand. We all take risks every day. But during the Obama administration, it seemed like the FDA was preventing innovation and innovative products from being used by us, preventing us to have choices. Dr. Dolan, what's going on here?
I mean, it's a problem when the government decides that they know better than you how for you to spend your life, what products to take, what food to eat, and you're right, I do care about people's health, and in an ideal world, I think people would not use tobacco in any form, but if there's an opportunity to use tobacco in a safer way, whether through vaping or other electronic devices where you don't have to inhale the entire thing, it seems highly peculiar to me that the government would say, no, you have to take the really bad stuff, and there's not going to give you an opportunity to transition. That just seems, I mean, sure, if your goal is to kill as many people as fast as possible, by all means, but I don't think that should be our government's goal.
It's the government taking away choices of people to make even healthier decisions for themselves. I'm going to just continue using the word absurd today. I don't think there's a better word for it. Tom, as the chief law dog of taxpayer resources and trying to prevent government waste, any thoughts?
Well, bureaucracy is in and of itself wasteful, not innovative. There's no competition, but it stifles competition outside of the government with rules and regulations. We're very proud of the Trump administration. They've cut back on rules and regulations. We've seen the impact on the economy. And of course, before that, there were, as we mentioned, 8 years of excessive regulation, excessive rules, and it really had a negative impact. And some of this is still left over. We have a fantastic cabinet. They're really trying hard to get through all the morass that they have to deal with on a daily basis, but those bureaucrats are really tough to fight with, and it's hard to fire them, almost impossible. So things like harm reduction, Congress said if something comes up that reduces the harm from tobacco, the FDA should approve it. Yet twice, these panels, scientific panels, have said, no, we don't think it's a good idea to do that.
Yeah, ACU conducts ratings of Congress. We've been doing it for 50 years. And we did something interesting. Every president has lots of members of Congress in their cabinet. And by far, the Trump administration cabinet is the most conservative cabinet in our history, in modern history. And I'm sure almost everybody here loves Ronald Reagan as much as I do. Jim, you worked directly for Ronald Reagan, but his cabinet was not nearly as conservative. Some people accepting, including you, and even my uncle who served in his cabinet. But the Trump cabinet is the most conservative.
It is a very conservative cabinet, but I would take some exception. I guess I'm ancient history, so I think the Reagan cabinet overall, which turned over, I mean, in 8 years, we've only had 1 year of the Trump administration, so it's not a perfect comparison, but we did some good things.
Yes, well, absolutely. Tom, you left off talking about innovation domestically, but abroad, there are foreign governments that are attacking American innovation. We've got China and South Korea in particular that are attacking American companies, inventors. Greg, Greg actually was born and raised in the Soviet Union. He knows what socialism is all about. He knows what government intervention is all about, and he's also an expert on intellectual property. He's kind of like an expert on everything. Greg, what's going on with South Korea and China?
So what's going on with China and South Korea is that, specifically with China more so, is that they don't respect our intellectual property rights. They free ride in a lot of our innovation, but they expect us to respect their intellectual property rights when they market their products and devices here. And look, Dan, I'm all for capitalism. If China produces good products cheaply, and if they can out-innovate us, I don't think it's good for us, but I want to be able to buy them. But it has to be a two-way street. We can't give them better treatment than they give us.
Yeah, again, this is capitalism. Look, Greg, I think you're exactly right. I think everybody would agree. If a Chinese company can produce a better product more cheaply, hey, that's capitalism. But what they should not be able to do is lie, cheat, steal.
Exactly.
Right? That's outside the rules. You cannot have capitalism if you do not enforce basic rules. But this is not the only example of where we have foreign governments intervening. I don't like how Americans are forced to pay their taxes to subsidize sugar, but that's nothing compared to what some of these countries are doing abroad. Jim?
Well, a very good example of that, Dan, is something called the Open Skies Agreements. We've got such agreements with 121 countries that let the airlines from different countries fly freely in this day and age. And it's been a great opportunity for those of us who travel abroad, a great opportunity for American airlines, except for two countries, the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, where over 10 years, those governments, those two tiny governments, put over $50 billion into subsidies. I mean, this is how absurd it is. Emirates Airlines owns half of all the Airbus 380s flying in the world today. That's the biggest airplane flying. It holds over 600 people. Now think about that, how tiny those countries are. The good news is that the Trump administration last month reached an agreement with Qatar, and the folks in Qatar agreed to cut it out. And if they play by the rules, you keep coming back to how important the rules are, if they play by the rules, we will have addressed half the problem. The UAE, where two of the three airlines that get these massive government subsidies are headquartered, however, has not reached agreement. And so we're working, those of us who work with the airlines are working with the Trump administration to address the problems with the UAE. And again, all we're asking is that everybody play by the same rules that, after all, are in treaties. I mean, treaties don't work if they're not enforced. That's a truism. And those are fundamental rules internationally. And again, this administration gets it, and we're very, very pleased with what they've done with Qatar, and I'm optimistic that we'll see a similar agreement in the near future with the UAE.
Yeah, so Jim, you worked in the Reagan cabinet, so you're using these big intellectual terms and words, but in the end, socialism sucks.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. we can't have, we can't allow foreign governments $50 billion of subsidies. This is absurd.
And they fly these planes, by the way, on routes that have driven the U.S. carriers out of the markets. There are only two American airlines today that fly between the U.S. and India, the second biggest country in the world after China, India. And only two of our airlines even try to compete because they've been driven out by these government-subsidized airlines.
Yeah. Well, we have one recognized, self-identified socialist in the U.S. Senate. That's Bernie Sanders. Now, I kind of like Bernie. He's an interesting character. I don't agree with him on anything, including his efforts to import socialism. So I turned to my friend who was born and raised in the Soviet Union, so he knows how terrible socialism is. What is this importation thing that Bernie Sanders is talking about?
So Bernie has been very big on drug reimportation. And so what that means is drugs that are being manufactured oftentimes in the United States, being sent to be sold in Germany, in the United Kingdom, in China, wherever drugs are needed, that those countries have price controls. And so those drugs there are cheaper.
Like Richard Nixon had price controls on oil.
Right. So the idea is buy drugs there at price controlled prices and then import them here. The problem is that the reason those countries have lower prices is because we are paying more for them. We are subsidizing countries that don't need subsidies, Germany, UK, and so on. And if we start reimportation, companies are not stupid. They'll eventually figure out that their profits that are currently driven by our consumers are not nearly enough. They're going to stop innovating. They're going to stop producing new drugs. We're ultimately going to be worse off. And the point is, it's not that we should import socialism here. It's that those countries that can afford to pay should pay more there. They should be more capitalist.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know that actually most of those drugs are probably manufactured in China under rules where the drugs, I actually heard this, and I forget what the statistic is, but something like 80, 90% of those drugs that claim to be what you are told they are not. But it's importing the socialist price control system. We've got to have those countries adopt free market principles. Then let's let people fight like cats and dogs within the rules. Now, Greg, you're also a professor. I just want to comment that Greg is the one who drafted the Supreme Court brief to try to end, there's a thing called the PTAB. It's at the Patent and Trademark Office. The PTAB is attacking the patents of American innovators. And the PTAB is basically the death panel for drugs, or rather for patents. I know that we're running out of time. So I just wanted to say that of all of these different issues we've addressed, the one thing that they all have in common is that it's government picking winners, picking losers, it's price controls, it's government taking choices away from you. Capitalism is worth keeping because any alternative to it means more poor people, more poverty, less wealth for everybody. Socialism sucks, and we've got to preserve our capitalist principles because that's what's right for America. If you want to do something, after all, the theme of this CPAC is a time for action. Whichever issue you found most interesting, that you care most about, call your senator. I'm going to give you a phone number, the Senate switchboard. It's area code 202-224-3121. Whichever one of these socialist price control systems meant the most to you, call your senator now and say, don't do this. Don't have control of our lives. Don't tell me how I'm going to choose to live my life. Let me have my own choices. Thank you all very much.